to introduce Anthony Brogdon. He is a historian and the author of Black Business Book, and That's My Land, a comprehensive book on the history of Black towns and settlements. He is the host of the internationally acclaimed podcast, Strong Inspirations, and producer of the nationally toured documentary, Business in Black. He has been nicknamed the voice of Black history. So today, Anthony is going to focus on the history of Black towns and settlements, including details on the first African American to own land in America, the first Black community in America, major migration movements, and names of Black towns and settlements before 1865. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Brogdon.
All right. Can you hear me? I kind of felt like a celebrity. I was standing back there and I was getting geared up and whatnot and ready to go and wanted to come in and dash, and my singers and dancers were behind me, and that all went away, and now we're just going to talk about what I like to call good Black history. And I call it there because this is about our successes. That's what I focus on. Because so much of what we hear is has let's say a negative slant to it. And that's not all the case. There were some successful African Americans even in the 1800s and before that, understandably, when we go back to Egypt, and I don't go that far in terms of my knowledge, that overcame the odds of the institution of enslavement and racism even during those days. And that's what I try to focus on. And I keep it light. I'm a native Detroiter. I went to school at Oakland University up in Rochester, and I didn't study history in school. I wanted to be an accountant. That lasted 2 years, and so on and so forth, but I always loved to write. And then I found my passion, and that's this Black history. And so that all came about because I was always doing different things in the city. And at one point I had a Black History Month event where I had some Black business owners from the 40s and 50s. They were all 70 years old and so on and so forth. And we had a panel discussion, and they talked about life being business owner back in the 40s and 50s. And so it was pretty interesting. I found that footage. That's when I decided to do the Business in the Black documentary. Took that to a bunch of cities like Tulsa and so on and so forth across the country. Then that led me to do my first book, which is this one. It's titled Black Business Book, where I talk about the rise of Black business in America. And I took that to a bunch of cities, you know, because I'm an adventuresome type guy, love travel, so on and so forth. And one of the towns that I visited, well, no, let me say this. One of the things she didn't say is, she did say it. I do host a podcast, too, Strong Inspirations. I invite you to take a look at it, where I've interviewed over 600 people around the world for them to share Black history stories. You know, it's Frederick Douglass's two-time great-grandson, Madam C.J. Walker's granddaughter, people who were sharecroppers. And I interviewed a guy in a town called Mount Bayou, Mississippi. And what happened was I just happened to Google Black History museums. Their museum came up, and I was like, oh, what is this town about? So in the interview, he tells the story about Mount Bayou being the jewel of the Delta, where the two founders come from a plantation about 80 miles away, where the enslaver would allow them to run the plantation. Unique circumstance. Because what I've come to find out is that time period has all kind of different dynamics. It's not everybody's mean and everybody's beat down. There's a whole bunch of gray area there. And so their guy would allow them to learn how to read and write, so on and so forth. And he allowed these two guys to run it. Then when he died, his brother took over, who was head of the Confederacy. So they'll go from a guy that's kind of a nice guy to this guy. He then says, hey, I don't want to have nothing to do with this because now Civil War is over. He sold them the plantation. And from that point, they paid off they were doing cotton, and they then had a bad crop year, what have you, and they moved to this town called Mount Bayou, and they bought 800 acres of swampland. An amazing story. and they grew this community. And so when I went there, that led me on this journey. When I got back, I was like, man, I'd never heard of it, and I got a feeling there are other people who hadn't heard of Mountain Bayou, and so many of these other towns and settlements across America. It's not just Tulsa, so on and so forth. And so that led me to write this book. Didn't take long to write it, take you about a few months, because I was on a mission. And if you see the book, I'm a kind of writer where I just give you the fact. I don't try to add no commentary. I just want you to know the fact. I give you where I found it so that it gets right to the heart of it. And that's kind of my writing style. That's what I did with my first book, and that's what I'll continue to do, because I think there's a uniqueness in that, saying, here, this is it right here, this is what happened, the dates, the people, you want to learn more, this is where you go. And so, would I click it here, or where do I click it to change? Okay, well, so this is me when I went to Mount Bayou. See, because what happened was, I decided that, hey, this such got a glorious story, I want to go see this place. So I talked to the guy, I can hit the space bar, right? Yeah. I talked to the guy back in January of, what's this, 26, probably January of 24, and said, hey, I want to come see Mount Bayou. You know, because I had been traveling and I want to go to these places. And he said, well, come on down for Founders Day. And so I said, when is that? It's the weekend after the 4th of July. And I said, what do y'all do? He said, we don't do much. We, meet at the cemetery, so on and so forth. And I was like, hey, I don't want to come that far, and that's all we do. So I ended up establishing a committee with the museum, and then we put together an event with speakers and so on and so forth, and I'm one of them, and other people. And it became real nice. But when I flew into Memphis, I drove about 45 miles, and that's the first thing I saw. And I could hear the voices of those people saying, this is ours. That's our land. And so that's one of the historical markers. Uh-oh, I went too far. How do I go back? Backspace?
Back arrow.
Huh?
Hit back arrow.
Yeah, hit back arrow. Okay. All right. I got it now. And so I saw that historical marker. That kind of explains more about Mount Bayou and what happened. And the one thing that's unique about it is they have what they call a higher grade of cotton than any place else because of the swampy land and the richness in the soil. And they had a bank, they had restaurants, a hotel, all the amenities to be self-sufficient in that little, probably no more than 20 miles, square miles long. In Mississippi, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's in Mississippi. And so it was a good time. I enjoyed it there. They got them big dragonflies. They look a little intimidating. But, and we had a good time. So that's the Mount Bayou. So then when I began to do the investigation, I said, well, where does this black land ownership start? And it starts with this guy, Anthony Johnson. He came on that boat when the Pilgrims got here from Europe. Probably the only African-American guy or African guy that came on the boat. And he came as an indentured servant, which meant that he had to do 4 to 7 years working for the guy who sponsored him because he didn't have enough money to pay the expenses himself. And so when he got here, he did his 4 years, then he went into business for himself and earned enough money where he sponsored 5 guys. And as a result of him sponsoring 5 people, they gave him 50 acres for each person. And that's how he ended up having, in 1621, in Massachusetts, 250 acres. Now, as we look at the timeline, and I talk about this in the book, we look at the timeline of America, Florida was the first that was settled here by the Spanish. And that's in the 1500s area. And understand, and I even talk about this in the book. Before them, the Native Americans / Indians were first, hundreds of years before anybody else. But they all got to St. Augustine. I had a good time. I was in St. Augustine 2 weeks ago. Sad part about it was only 50 degrees during the day and 30 at night, so I didn't catch the heat spell. But I flew into Fort Lauderdale and I drove up to St. Augustine, which is about 3.5 miles. I spoke at Flagler College, and then I toured this place, Fort Mose. The story about this is, when you were enslaved in South Carolina, you couldn't run all the way north. It's a long distance, understandable. It's not that you couldn't, but but if you could get to Florida and actually get to Fort Mose, you could have a good shot at freedom, because the Spanish said, hey, you get here, claim you're Catholic, help us fight against British invasion, you got your freedom. And so they said about 100 some odd families lived at the fort. And it's a replica of it now. It's probably about 7, 8 acres in its original form. And so that's where they went to, and they found freedom. And we wanted freedom. We wanted to own land to create a safer environment, to be on like-minded people, and become self-reliant. Understandably. And we did a lot of things to do such. And I always wondered, I said, how did they have money to buy land? And that was one of the things that they did, even from the institution of enslavement. And so they, earned money on their off days, selling fruits and meats and crafts. They got some wages if they exceeded quota. You got to put 80 barrels of cotton. You do another 20 barrels. You sell that in the market. You get to keep the money. And I found that there were enslaved African Americans who owned businesses. And that's what I talk about in my first book. One of the guys that I always tell his story is a guy named Frank McWhorter, born in 1777, enslaved in Kentucky. And his enslaver allowed him to have some liberties. He found the ingredients for gunpowder on the plantation and did what he had to do to make it up. And he owned a business doing this. He became so wealthy that he bought his freedom and the freedom of 15 other people. They called him Free Frank. What was so unique, not just that part of it, but also then he left Kentucky and he moved to Illinois, and he developed his own town called New Philadelphia. He had about 20 acres. Both blacks and whites lived in his community. He made himself the mayor. Well, this is my town, I'm the mayor. And these are the kind of conditions that we're going to live under.
I know that's right.
Yeah. And I interviewed his two-time great-grandson on my show, a guy named Dr. Gerald McWhorter, he said, under what my grandfather had done and the legacy left, I went to be a doctor. And that's how he told it. And he was a professor at, I think, one university in Chicago. But there is a Frank McWhorter Day in that community. And I'm going, I think it's in September. Now, I do want to, I got a lot to cover in about an hour, so I'm going to scatter around, just give you some of it and go from there. But one of the things that happened and I wanted to talk about is the significant migration movements out of the South. Let me back up. There were a couple states that had more enslaved people than they had total population. And that could easily be understood because on a plantation, it's me, it's my wife, it's my brother, his wife, and a couple other people. And we got 400 enslaved people. So you can understand how those numbers would be screwed in that way. And so there were different migration movements out of the South, and one of them that I always talk about is the Trail of Tears, where 60,000 Native Americans, Indians from different tribes, including their slaves, including those who were married to the Indians, they moved all the way from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all the way to Oklahoma. Thousands of miles. They walked. And they call it the Trail of Tears because many of them lost their lives along the way. Because you could walk into one state and the guy said, you can't come through here, you got to walk around. You're walking through the winters and so on and so forth. And much of it was walking, if not all of it. And so they lost their lives, and this is kind of one of the maps of how they got from, like, say, from Tennessee to Oklahoma. Another one, and so while they were there in Oklahoma, you know what they said is, hey, man, this is a free state. I'm out of here. I'm leaving this reservation. And at one point, Oklahoma had over 50 different settlements. And there's little communities like Bowley and Renniesville, Langston. Oklahoma City, it was a city itself, but there were communities, and they probably at one point had a larger black population than did Tulsa. See, because Tulsa is just, and I've been to Greenwood District, it's a neighborhood. It's not the city. It's a neighborhood on the other side of the tracks, let's call it. But they had oil in that community, and they were thriving as a result of the wealth. And it was really heartfelt when I went to Tulsa, because I was there where the massacre happened. You know, I could see the remnants of it. This is a historical marker. This business was here, this business was there. And you could really feel the anguish, but the resiliency too, because what they don't tell you is Tulsa built up better than we did when they first burned it down. There was a period where it came up even better. And so they had all these little towns in Tulsa and Oklahoma and so on and so forth. So they had a real thriving community. They still had some sense of racism, understandably, and some sense of slavery, but still they moved away and were able to do and thrive in that way. And this is the guy here, O.W. Gurley, who's considered the founder of Greenwood District in Tulsa. Tulsa was thriving, people were moving there, good land mass, so on and so forth. And he said, hey, come here. But he wasn't the only one. There was a guy named Edward McCain who had a newspaper in Langston. And Edward McCain promoted in his paper, like, hey, he was sending it out, come to Oklahoma, come to Oklahoma. And a lot of people got the word out. This is where you get to. You get out here, you got a good shot at it. And so there were all these communities. This one here, Freeze Hill, if you can see it, 1865. Because I said not just that they bought the land, but there were other ways that they got it. And this is one of them, that their enslaver gave them the land in North Carolina. And I said, well, dang, if that slavery is going on, how, you know, in this situation, how did they be able to thrive? The person said, leave them alone. There were all kind of dynamics to this. And this is just one of the communities. And they have a historical foundation, and a lot of them have, you know, comeback day from the descendants and things of that sort.
Everyone took the last name of Hill.
Right.
That's when they got different names.
Right.
Like that, you know?
Right. Jamestown is another one. Guy bought in 1870 by a former enslaved guy, Edward James. People still live on this property. It's amazing, because they wanted to do it. They said, we're going to make a way. Once this is over, we understand how great we are. And they built these communities. And I interviewed one of the guys on there, and they have a big coming together every year. And he still lives on that land. Another big movement was the Exodusters movement, where about 20 to 40,000 African Americans moved from the South to Kansas. Kansas had a real big community, and still does. And one of the communities in Kansas that I got to go see, and I'm looking to do it this year, is a neighborhood called Quindaro. And what happened was, there's a Kansas City, Kansas, and a Kansas City, Missouri. Well, the Missouri is a slave state. There's a river that I don't know how wide it is. I don't think it's as wide as the Detroit River. If you can get across that and get to Kansas, then you could, you know, be in free territory. That don't mean that he can't come look for you, though. I interviewed a guy who, his great-great-grandfather did that. In the middle of the night, swam across that river. He got there. Very industrious guy, and ended up opening up a lumber yard. And he told the enslaver, he got word back to him. He said, you come looking for me, one of us is not going to leave here. And I got something to fight for. And he left him alone. Because it's not far. And I got to go see Quindaro. But that Exodus movement, thousands met there. And the other thing is, and I'll say this, that really helped make that movement happen was this guy named John Brown. John Brown said, I'm dying for this. I hate this institution. And if you don't know, John Brown's a white guy. He had a raid on Harper's Ferry. He did a lot of battles. He shot at people, and they killed him when they caught him. And they, eventually he got more resources. They caught up with him. But John Brown, they got statues, all kind of stuff in his honor for his fight against enslavement. And the other group that really helped out a lot was the Quaker community. At one point, Philadelphia had more black people than any other city in America back in the 1800s. Because if you could get there, coming out of the boats or something like that, out of the South, then you had a shot because the Quaker community. And then they had some gradual emancipation laws also. And a couple unique stories is there's a guy, his name is Robert Smalls. He come out of South Carolina. Robert Smalls was working on one of them Confederate ships. He noticed that before they got to the port, they would go off in the woods and play and stuff like that. And he told his family, he called them on the cell phone. That's a joke, right? He called them on the cell phone and said, hey, meet me at such and such at 10 o'clock at night. I'm still in this boat and we leaving. And he did. He got to Philadelphia. He took the Confederate flag down. But even more before that, what was so smart about it is he had to understand how to get through the waters. He had to have the captain's outfit on, he had to know the signals, and he had to know what waters to sail down. Because, understand there's always high and low parts in the river. And he made it. When he got there, he told them, says, y'all can have this boat, let us go free. And he got to Philadelphia. Slavery ends. He goes back to South Carolina, becomes an elected official during Reconstruction period. Big dude down in South, Robert Smalls. And another story, a guy ends up in Philadelphia, was a guy named Henry Brown. Henry Brown was seeing that his family was about to be sent further south. He said, I had enough of this. He built a box just big enough for him to fit in. He wrote on the top side of the box, this side up, which was real smart. And then found somebody to help him put it on the boat, ship it to Philadelphia. But in that voyage, somebody turned the box right side down. He tells the story, he's about to die because the blood is gushing to his head. Somebody read, said, oh man, you got the box wrong. Just in the nick of time, so to speak. Turn the box upside down, he makes it to Philadelphia. He gets to Philadelphia and becomes like a comedian because he's telling everybody, let me tell you how I got here. He's making jokes about it. Well, they heard about it and he had to go to Canada. He had to flee. He's like, man, we're going to get this guy. He's making us look bad. Henry Box Brown. There's a town in Canada called St. Catharines. It's right on the other side of Buffalo. That's where Harriet Tubman lived for 7 years. She fled that far. And I interviewed somebody who said their great-great-grandfather was Harriet Tubman's minister. And when you see the picture, she looked mad, doesn't she? What's all that walking she was doing? She's in great shape. But the crazy part about it, she was only really walking, I shouldn't say only, but she was just going to Massachusetts. That's where she was, where she was born and raised. The plantation was. So it wasn't deep in it. Well, it's still hundreds and hundreds of miles, but nonetheless. And then I'm just staying on the migration. That great migration from the South that ended up here in the northern territories like Detroit, nearly 5 million of us came during about 1910 to 1970. And they also went out west and so on and so forth. But that's how Detroit and Chicago and all these other cities, our population just expanded and just grew as a result of that. And I know my great-grandfather, that's how he got here from South Carolina. Said they just put him on the bus. He was by himself with a little box, and that's how he made it. And he got here. He said he came by himself. He was like 11 or 12, And there was a lot of that going on. But he had a brother here, an older brother, and that's where he stayed, and uncles and so on and so forth. And so that's how a lot of the northern part. And even like in Detroit, in 1910, our population was somewhere around 4,000 people. It grew to about 120 by 1930. That's when we had and that's when we had what we call the Black Bottom areas. Down there where Greektown Casino is, Lafayette Park, I-75 or 375 in that district. But the unique part about it is, see, Detroit grew. The first neighborhood is Corktown.
Yeah.
That's where it all started in Detroit. And then it grew from there. And Black Bottom was not just a neighborhood of African American people. It was Germans and Dutch, and everybody was kind of a melting pot. And it was an older neighborhood, so the houses in some respects looked dilapidated and so on and so forth. And so they thought that's where we would run that section of the freeway. But what they did, and the thing about it, when you're talking about destroying neighborhoods, that Freeway Act of 1950 went through a ton of cities. And it wasn't just Detroit. I'm almost certain that almost every city will say that the freeway kind of cut through all of our neighborhoods. And some of it was intended, I'm sure. They even say the one in Detroit was intended there for that to happen. Yeah, because it could have went a little bit distance and not been so devastating. Yeah. Every town that I have in my book, and I got over 150, all of them face some sense of racism. Every one of them. Dulles Airport in New York used to be Willett, Virginia. It was a black community, it was thriving. They found a way through any domain to say that's where we're going to put the airport. Lake Lanier in Georgia used to be a community called Oscarville, Georgia. It was thriving. But they needed a lake to help, Atlanta grow and so on and so forth. And the thing about Lake Lanier is they say it's haunted. They have deaths in that lake almost every year, boat accidents and things of that sort, because of what they had done. And there's a ton of more of those kind of communities that have been destroyed. Now, in our ingenuity, we developed our own resorts. This resort right here was developed by Frederick Douglass's son, Highland Beach in Massachusetts. And you all know, most of us know the resort here in Detroit, in Michigan, is Idlewild. Thriving communities. So we're not just saying we're going to build our own town. We're going to find some luxurious places, some beach resorts, and we're going to do some cottages, and we're going to build some hotels, and the biggest name acts coming through. Idlewild was one of those. Yeah, oh, sure. Dr. Daniel Hale he bought land up there, big investor, and so many other people. But Highland Beach is still operating, still going. I mean, still going. American Beach over on the coast of Florida is another one. Rich African-American guy named Abraham Lincoln Lewis, he was in the insurance business. He bought that land on this island. As we talk about that migration, I don't know if you knew that it was an African-American that founded Chicago. He was a settler. He came through Michigan, and he settled in Chicago area. And there's a historical marker right on Michigan Avenue, right there where that little canal runs down that separates the north and the south, right there. I think it's across from the Sun-Times newspaper.
And they never talk about it.
Yeah, it's right there. He's the guy. This is a town, Hobsonville. I can't see the writing. I'm in touch with the mayor. They got 1,000 people that still live in that town. Don't have a school, so they go to the next community and so on and so forth. She said, but we got pride here. This is ours. And that's all she talked about when I did the interview. And so now I'm going to see her in 3 weeks because I got to go from here to Atlanta, from Atlanta to Montgomery, book signing Montgomery, Hobsonville, and then on the way to Selma for the bridge crossing. I enjoy that bridge crossing. Oh, is that it? Okay. There are, I'm going to give you some more. I don't know how much time I got, but in any event, I got a lot of these towns that I have found across America. communities that we built, thriving communities. I interviewed a guy in South Carolina. It's called Phillips Community. That's his ancestors bought this land, and now they are using it for new development, gentrification. They're coming in there building these $5 million homes or more, what have you. And he says what it does is, he says my house was worth $30,000 or something. Now because of all these other houses, my house now is worth for me. He said, but I don't want to move. But I got to pay tax as if it's $1 million house. And that's how they have to leave. Many of them have to leave. And then when they build these big houses, they have to build the infrastructure, the basements and stuff like that. They raise it up just a little bit, so now the water drains to the lower lying houses. He said, we got flooding all the time. We got that problem we got to deal with. We got communities along South Carolina in that Gullah Geechee corridor, the St. Helena Islands and so on and so forth, Hilton Heads. Many of them, what happened was when they came through, and I'm talking about they being the northern troops, when they came through during the Civil War, the slave people were on these large plantations. So now they're free because the enslavers, they run. They said, okay, well, we got to find some place for you to live, so they find them their own communities. And what happened was, in some instances, this general goes down there and he says, okay, well, we're going to come up with this 40 acres and a mule concept. Which was, I understood that. It was well-intentioned. And it was under President Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln gets killed like a couple weeks after that. President Jackson comes in and says, no, forget that. We're returning the land to the enslavers. There were various government policies that helped African Americans get land. There was Homestead Acts, things of that sort. There were different, and the Homestead Act meant if you left the South and moved out to Oklahoma and Kansas and what have you, undeveloped land, we would give it to you. You may pay us a little small fee. We'd give you the land, but you got to improve it in some form or fashion. Some of that, when it first happened, is that African Americans were not able to take advantage because they had no ID, couldn't read and write, so on and so forth, wasn't citizens. So it took the citizens, the acts of the 13th Amendment to help us, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and then the 14th Amendment. Then we were able to take advantage of government policies to a great extent. There were little communities in Indiana and Ohio, all along that corridor because they were close to the border states. If you could get there, you could get your sense of freedom. There were communities in Canada. There's one called Buxton that I go to. I've been there a couple of times. They do a Founders Day, Labor Day weekend. It's probably about 45 minutes away. The enslaver took his people to Buxton for them to have freedom. Because Canada ended enslavement many years before they did here in America. But even before that, they said that, okay, if they get here, we're not going to let you take them back. And they ended that institution. And so Buxton, Amherstburg, is not just far, it's just on the other side. They have a beautiful museum that I've been to in Amherstburg. They have a nice small pocket of community. But this museum is a church. That's where the enslaved people built this church. It's still Hawking. And when you walk on it, you can see that's the original wood in Amherstburg. Mexico had communities. If you could get out of Texas and get to Mexico, Mexico saved a lot of people. There's communities not just, and going back to Canada, there's communities in Nova Scotia, Canada. And what happened was they told the enslaved people, hey, if you come and fight for the British against America, and my man probably said, hey, I don't have it good here either, so what I'll go for it. Fought for the British, lost, got on another boat, and sailed to Nova Scotia, big thriving community in Nova Scotia. They were all over America. It's all kind of dynamics to this, how this all happened. Texas was a huge community. I've been to Galveston. Galveston has a place called the 1887 Settlement. 4 families founded that. Galveston, I didn't know, is an island. And it's like 50 miles off the coast of Houston. So I flew to Houston and I drove to Galveston. And it's just a little inlet that takes you over to the island. I don't know how large it is, but it's a city, so it's pretty life-size island. They had thousands of enslaved people because they were coming out of Cuba. And the cotton was rich. And they were isolated. So they got the word last in many respects because they were isolated. I mean, it wasn't, maybe telegram or something like that, but they had cell phones, that wasn't happening. I stood where General Gordon Granger read Order Number 2. It's a museum called the Near Cultural Center. They invited me to come down a couple years ago. Big deal for me. I was excited. And in the parking lot is where he read that order. And if you close your eyes, you could hear the jubilation in the air. And right down the street, I walked to where the port was, where they brought them in. It's just on the other side of the street. I walked there, and I could hear the cries of them getting off that boat. Now it's a restaurant and so on and so forth. And across the street from the museum was the slave auction site, which is now a souvenir shop. That's Galveston Island. But Texas had, and they call them colonies in Texas. Texas had hundreds of them, little small pockets that once they got their freedom, they moved and stayed within the state. And there were a lot of those. I found towns in South Dakota, just little, 1 or little 2s or something like that, that people went out there for various jobs. There's a resort town in Colorado called Lincoln Hills. There's a resort town in California called Allensworth. And I gotta say, Allensworth is probably the only one I found that didn't really face no racial strife. And it was only because the guy who founded it used to be in the Army. So he had his own guns, and the other people that moved there had guns who they were his Army buddies in Allensworth. But there were a lot of those kind of communities, there were resort communities that were thriving and that we had our own self-sufficiency, our own businesses. And it's just amazing to hear these stories, to know of them, and how we moved away, how we walked miles to get to these places, all the way from Florida and North Carolina and South Carolina and Virginia to get all the way to Oklahoma. And then, those who made it to be thriving people. And how we got all the way to Ohio's and so on and so forth, and the Philadelphias. And Philadelphia has a lot of communities. And then I talk about the various neighborhoods that happen in the cities, not just Detroit's Black Bottom, but like Atlanta's Auburn Avenue, little Haiti in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, with North Carolina Mutual Insurance Agency, and how they were such a thriving business. And how they bought this land, how they got it, how they took advantage of governmental policies and actions, how they gave of their lives, and how they came together so that they could say, this is ours. And like I say, in many instances. Huh?
And that the struggle was real.
Oh, man. But they did do it. It's incredible type things that there was one where the people were enslaved. This is going into Ohio. The enslaver says, okay, I'm gonna give you your freedom and I'm gonna give you some money to buy some land. And I found the land. So they get there and the people say, no, we ain't selling it to you. So they floundered for about 7 years and then had court action that allowed them to settle and buy the land in various parts of Ohio. Piqua is one of those communities. And they said, this is ours, and this is my land, that's my land. And they talk about it so often. And I got a friend of mine, he's an attorney. He said he got a call from a buddy of his. He didn't even know the guy. I got a call. He says, man, I got a call from a developer. I got some land in my family. And the guy says, hey, we found you. You're the only one we find. It's like 800 acres. Somebody been paying the tax, what have you. How much you want to sell it for? The guy said, man, I ain't have a clue. Called the attorney. The attorney said, give him $2 million. He told him $2 million. The guy says, hey, let me think about it. He called him back in a year, said, done. Because it was all prime. I mean, it was in those, a lot of it was along the waterways. And in the big cities, it was in the downtown areas. Because that's where it started in some pocket in downtown and then grew from there. Just like Detroit's Black Bottom did. Auburn Avenue was just right on the edge of downtown. Fourth Ward in Houston, same thing. Deep Ellum, we used to be a black community in Dallas. And there's all these communities in all these states that's just pretty amazing that in the 1800s, we were able to accomplish that in the 1900s. In 1910, we had, that's the high part of our land ownership. We had what they said was about 14% of the land in America. And I'm not gonna go into no negativity about what we got now, but it's 14%. And there's various reasons, unscrupulous paper, with the court records and stuff like that. And when you deed the land to some elder, they sell it off. And if I sell my portion, then the whole thing got to go. Can't just pick up a pocket and, okay, you keep yours, my brother or something like that. So it's all kind of things that happen. And then a lot of us did leave the South, those different movements, move up north. And moved to the south side of Chicago and so on and so forth. And in many times they said they faced more when they came north than they did in the south.
That's true.
In many respects. And it's just amazing to hear these stories of what we did in these various communities, even in the South too. In southern states, in northern states. So, I don't know, questions?
Where can we get your books?
Right here. Oh. I got them in the bag. I sleep with them under the pillow. Oh. It's crazy because it book $10. I don't need it in my basement. I know what's in it. I want people to have this. And so that's all. That's what that's the cost.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. I was hearing that you have a podcast and also I think it was a business or such. Could you give us the name of those, please?
Yeah, the podcast is called Strong Inspirations. On YouTube.
Okay, on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. And you can see a lot of the videos there. You're all familiar with Wilberforce, Ohio, right? Yeah, that black community. Yeah. That built that school. Langston in Oklahoma, Langston University. Tuskegee at one point had more land than any other university in America because of what Booker T. Washington had done. He started in that school, in that church, and he built that school up. And they had hospitals and everything else to make it a thriving community in the heart of Tuskegee.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And oh my goodness, I found out about Nova Scotia from doing my genealogy.
Oh, really?
I had people up there. My DNA was up there. And I didn't even know the history of that until, just wonderful. And my people came back down to the South. And a lot of them ended up in Ypsilanti.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, Ypsilanti was a big pocket. Oh, for sure. Detroit had a couple. They had the one near Ferndale, Royal Oak Township. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was a pocket.
Yeah, I've just got a question as far as the towns that are around Michigan and Ohio. Do you have anything in your books about those towns, like Chillicothe? You talk about Langston. Well, I think it was Charles Langston that was down in Chillicothe, and of course, one of his descendants was Langston Hughes. There was also Nancy Wilson that came from Chillicothe.
Really?
There's areas around the Kalamazoo area that were in the early 1800s. You had Sojourner Truth that was around Jackson or Battle Creek.
Right.
There's plenty of towns that are around this area. Also, I think about the how did people travel? And a lot of people traveled near the waterways because that's where the food source was. But that's also where the old Indian trails, like the Sioux Trail that went from Detroit going towards the Wild Garlic place, which is Chicago. There's just tons of towns around this area and how these areas were developed. Do you have any stories on that?
Well, yeah, do some on Michigan. It's one of the things like if you're a wine connoisseur, you don't know every wine. You know what I mean? So I do have a lot of them in Indiana and Ohio, little small pockets, as best as I can find. And all I tell you in the book is this is who founded it, and does it where it is compared to another major city, and does it exist today? In most senses, because maybe people want to travel there. That's how I'm able to have so many, but a lot of the towns might not exist because people just moved away, like that New Philadelphia. People, they cut off the train depot. People couldn't even get to it. And when they cut off the train depot, it ceased to exist in many respects. So understandably, the land is still there, but now it's sucked into another larger major community. And so many of them that face that kind of thing. Or the residents just wanted to leave away some of the strife. Here's another one that just came to mind. When we were enslaved, we fled to the swamps and became maroon communities. There's a term like that, maroons, where they fled to, and there was the Great Dismal Swamp is up near Virginia and that upper area right there near the waters. It's like 1 million acres in its day. They would flee into the swamps with all the snakes and alligators, and had to cut the trees down and so on and so forth for freedom. Even Mount Bayou, that's what it was. It was swampland. They cut the trees down. And then they filled in the land, and now with people, they're killing off whatever need to, and built a thriving community. That's what Rosewood is. Rosewood, Florida was a swamp community in the middle of nowhere. And they had them all over America. So we even did that to get away.
Again, Ann Arbor. I was born and raised here, do genealogy. Started 1828. John Wesley Brooks, 2 doors from my house, purchased land in Ann Arbor, worked with the abolitionists, Asher Ray, and also William Lambert in Detroit.
Right.
Ann Arbor black community was started in the 1800s. And studying my genealogy and stuff, and that's how I learned, and people don't know about that. And all like Carytown now and all that used to be a whole black community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how a lot of them, went where the jobs were and built communities. That Rosewood, because it was a lumber yard there. And then built, and there's one there that was out of Florida. It's called the Sticks. Got a unique kind of history. There's a guy named Flagler who is an oil man, and he built a railroad that came through there, so on and so forth, out of St. Augustine. And so he's building these hotels on this little island. He has a lot of African Americans come move there, so on and so forth. And then he looks up and says, "Hey man, I want that land back. It's on the island. It's prime land." So this is the rumor mill. Somebody from his camp or somebody somewhere tells them, "Hey, it's a party on the mainland. Everybody go to the party." You shaking your head like you heard this, right? Yeah, they go to the party, they come back, their house has been burned down. Yeah. Now, I was just there 2 weeks ago. I mean, the $1 million homes, all in that what used to be a black community. It's prime land. And that was one of the areas. So, but I don't leave on that negativity. I just talk about the greatness and how the people work together. All races in many respects, though. Because if it wasn't for those governmental acts and that 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and so on and so forth, it would have been a lot slower progress. But it was people giving their lives. And then when Abraham Lincoln said, hey, we can let the colored troops come in, the colored troops came in, they wiped the war out. That was the end of that. And it was the colored troops that went down there to Galveston with General Gordon Granger. Can you imagine what that jubilation could have been like, telling those people? But even then, they told them, they said, hey, well, okay, you're free, but we don't want you coming downtown. We want you to stay on the plantation, and we're going to call it sharecropping. That's kind of where that all began. And I've interviewed people who said they were sharecroppers. I mean, if they 80 years old, when they were 11, they remember that institution down in the Mississippis. And it never went well. But then one lady told me, she said her mother said, we leaving here. I don't care what happens. And they moved to Mount Bayou, Mississippi. And it changed her life to where she went to college in Chicago, ended up working for Harry Belafonte, moving to New York to be the voice, not New York, of London, England, to be the voice in London, England. She said it was because of what I got out of Mount Bayou, Mississippi.
Okay, thank you all for coming today, and let's thank our speaker, Mr. Brogdon, one more time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you much.